The Valenthi research station was dying. It floated in the cold darkness of space, orbiting a star that had begun to collapse centuries ago. The station had been built to study that dying star, to learn its secrets, before it finally went dark forever. But now the station itself was falling apart. 312 Valenthi were trapped inside with nowhere to go. Commander Cirith stood at the central console, watching warning lights flash red across every screen. The reactor was failing. The outer hull had cracked in 7 places. Life support would last maybe 12 more cycles, and that was if nothing else went wrong. Something always went wrong. She had sent the distress signal 8 cycles ago. It had gone out to every corner of civilized space, to every species that had ships capable of reaching them. The responses had come back one by one, and each one said the same thing. Too far, too dangerous, too late. The Galactic Concord, the great alliance of 12 elder species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, had done the math. Their fastest ships would take 40 cycles to reach the station. The station would be gone in 12. There was nothing to be done. The Valenthi would simply have to accept their fate. Cirith had grown up believing in the wisdom of the Concord. Her people had been members for 3,000 years, and in that time, they had learned to trust the judgment of species far older and wiser than themselves. If the Concord said rescue was impossible, then rescue was impossible. That was simply how things were. But she could not stop looking at the faces of her crew. Young faces, old faces, frightened faces, trying to be brave. 312 lives. And the galaxy had decided they were not worth saving. She was about to turn off the distress beacon when a new signal came through. It was weak, coming from a region of space that her charts showed as mostly empty. A backwater area with only a handful of inhabited worlds, none of them members of the Concord. The message was short. This is Earth Vessel Endurance. We received your distress signal. We are coming. Hold on. Cirith stared at the words for a long moment. Earth. She had never heard of it. She pulled up the galactic database and searched for any record of this planet and its people. What she found was not encouraging. Earth was a small world orbiting an average star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Its inhabitants called themselves humans. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 32 years ago. They were not members of the Concord. They had no alliance with any major power. By galactic standards, they were children who had just learned to walk, and they were saying they could reach a station that the mightiest civilizations in the galaxy had declared unreachable. Cirith almost deleted the message. It had to be a mistake or a cruel joke, or perhaps these humans simply did not understand how far away the station was. But something made her hesitate, something in the simple confidence of those words. We are coming. Hold on, she sent a reply. Earth vessel, this station is located in Sector 742, near the Vorthen Nebula. Distance from your territory is approximately 40 light cycles. Our situation is critical. We have 12 cycles at most before complete structural failure. The response came back within minutes. Understood. We have plotted a course. Estimated arrival time is 11 cycles. Repeat, 11 cycles. Keep your people alive. We will handle the rest. 11 cycles. That was impossible. No ship in the galaxy could travel that fast. The physics simply did not allow it. Cirith knew this with the certainty of someone who had spent her entire life among the stars, but she also knew that her people were going to die. And this strange signal from a species she had never heard of was the only response that had not told her to give up. She reported the contact to the Concord. High Arbiter Vorlon, the ancient leader who had guided the Alliance for 600 years, listened to her report with what she could only describe as tired amusement. Commander, these humans are a primitive species, he said, his image flickering on her screen. They have no technology that could accomplish what they claim. They are either lying to you, or they are too foolish to understand the reality of your situation. Either way, you should not waste your remaining time on false hope. But what if they are telling the truth? Cirith asked. They are not, Vorlon said firmly. The mathematics are clear. Focus on preparing your people for what is to come. Help them find peace. The connection closed, and Cirith was left alone with her dying station and her 312 frightened people. She did not tell them about the human message. She did not want to give them hope that would only be crushed. Instead, she organized repair crews and rationed supplies and did everything she could to buy more time. Every hour mattered. Every minute. But the human messages kept coming. Every few hours, a new transmission would arrive from the Endurance. Simple updates. 26 hours out, still coming, then 20 hours out. Your signal is getting stronger. Then, 14 hours out, we can see the nebula. Cirith found herself waiting for those messages. She did not believe them, not really. But there was something in their steady confidence that she could not ignore. These humans, whoever they were, seemed absolutely certain that they would arrive in time. They did not ask if it was possible, did not discuss the odds, they simply kept coming. On the 10th cycle, with the station shaking from explosions in the lower decks and fires spreading through the engineering section, Cirith finally told her crew about the humans. "I do not know if they will make it," she said, standing before them in the central hub where they had all gathered. "I do not know if they are telling the truth, but they are trying. Someone out there heard our call, and instead of telling us to accept our fate, they are flying as fast as they can to reach us." She looked at their faces, at the fear and exhaustion and fading hope. "I think we owe it to them to still be alive when they get here. The Volanthi were not a species known for their emotion. They prided themselves on logic, on calm acceptance, on facing reality without flinching. But in that moment, something stirred in them, something old and almost forgotten. They got back to work, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, a ship called the Endurance pushed its engines beyond every limit they had been designed to handle. Its hull groaned, its reactors screamed, its crew went without sleep for days at a time, held together by coffee and stubbornness, and a simple refusal to let strangers die alone. They were coming. The sensors screamed at the end of the 11th cycle. Something massive had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, moving at speeds that should have torn any ship into pieces. Cirith ran to the console, her heart's pounding in her chest, not daring to believe what she was seeing. The ship was huge and ugly. It looked nothing like the elegant vessels of the Concorde, with their smooth curves and gleaming hulls. This thing was blocky and angular, covered in scorch marks and welded patches that looked like they had been applied in a hurry. Entire sections of its outer armor were missing. Smoke or steam was venting from at least 3 places. It looked like it had been dragged through a war zone. It looked like it should not still be flying, but it was flying. It was flying straight toward the station at a speed that made Cirith's instruments flash warnings. A voice came through on all frequencies. It was tired and rough, but absolutely steady. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes, of the Earth vessel Endurance. We received your distress signal. We are beginning emergency extraction. How many souls aboard?" Cirith found that her voice would not work at first. She had to swallow twice before she could respond. 312. But our docking ports are damaged. There is no way for you to connect safely. "We are not docking," the human captain replied. "We are coming in through your cargo bay. Clear the area and move your people to the central hub. We will handle the rest." Before Cirith could argue, before she could explain that the cargo bay was half destroyed and filled with debris, the human ship changed course. It accelerated toward the station, and Cirith watched in horror as it flew directly into the field of wreckage surrounding the damaged bay. Any Concorde vessel would have stopped. Any sane pilot would have found another way. But the Endurance simply pushed through. Metal screamed against metal. Debris bounced off its scarred hull. The ship took hit after hit, and it just kept coming. It crashed through the outer debris field and came to rest against the ruined edge of the cargo bay. Before the dust had even settled, doors on the side of the ship burst open, and figures began pouring out. They were humans. Cirith had never seen one in person before. They were smaller than she had expected, soft-looking creatures with strange, flat faces and only 2 arms. They wore heavy suits covered in equipment, and they moved with a speed and purpose that seemed almost frantic. Their leader was a woman with short, dark hair and hard eyes. She took one look at the destruction around her and immediately began shouting orders. Structural damage is worse than the scans showed. We have maybe 2 hours before this whole section collapses. Everyone moves now. Lopez, get your team to the medical bay. Pull the injured first. Garcia, I need emergency supports on those bulkheads. Now, not later. The humans scattered like they had done this 1,000 times before. They did not hesitate. They did not ask questions. They simply went to work. The woman turned to Cirith. I am Lieutenant. Inti Kate Morrison. You are the commander here. Yes, I am Cirith. Good. I need you to gather your people in the central hub. Anyone who can walk helps anyone who cannot. We are going to get everyone out, but we need them ready to move. Cirith wanted to ask how. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to ask 100 questions about who these creatures were and how they had done the impossible. But there was no time. Understood, she said, and ran to gather her people. The next 2 hours were chaos. The station groaned and shook as more sections failed. Fires broke out in the lower decks. Walls collapsed. Through it all, the humans kept working. Cirith watched them with something close to disbelief. A human engineer named Tony Reyes discovered that a main corridor had completely collapsed, blocking the path to a group of trapped Valantha. The logical solution was to find another route. The human solution was to pull out a cutting tool and start carving through the wall. That wall is load-bearing, Cirith told him. If you cut through it, this entire section could collapse. Reyes did not stop cutting. Then I will cut fast. He did. He carved a hole through a wall that should have taken hours to breach in less than 20 minutes. Then he crawled through into the darkness on the other side and started pulling Valanthi through one by one in another section. Lieutenant Morrison was told that a damaged area was too unstable to enter. Radiation was leaking from a cracked power conduit. The structural supports were failing. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. Morrison listened to the report, nodded, and said, How many people are trapped in there? 2. Children. She was through the door before anyone could stop her. 4 minutes later, she came back out, carrying 2 small Valanthi, one under each arm. Her suit was smoking from the radiation exposure. She handed the children to a medic and immediately asked, Where else? Cirith found herself assigned to help coordinate the evacuation from the human ship. The inside of the Endurance was nothing like she had expected. Where Concord vessels were clean and orderly, this ship was cluttered and messy. There were personal items everywhere. Pictures on the walls, plants in small containers, a strange board with numbers and letters that someone had written messages on. One message caught her eye. It said, 312 people are counting on us. Do not let them down. The crew of the Endurance had written their own countdown. Every time a Valanthi was brought aboard, someone would update the number. 312 became 311. Then 310. Then 298. Captain Hayes remained on the bridge throughout the operation. He was an older man, with gray in his hair and lines on his face that spoke of many years and many hard decisions. He coordinated the rescue with calm efficiency, tracking every team, monitoring every structural reading, making decisions in seconds that would have taken a Concorde. Committee hours to debate. When a section collapsed and cut off one of the rescue teams, Hayes did not panic. He simply pulled up a schematic, found another route, and guided them out. When the reactor began its final failure, he calculated exactly how much time they had left and pushed his people to move faster. 94 people still on the station, he announced. 40 minutes until structural collapse. Everyone moves double time. But Cirith did not know how they did it. She would never fully understand. But somehow, in those final desperate minutes, the humans managed to pull every single Valanthi off the dying station. The last one aboard was Cirith herself, dragged through an airlock by Lieutenant Morrison, just as the corridor behind them finally gave way. The Endurance pulled away from the station with 30 seconds to spare. Through the viewports, Cirith watched the place she had called home for the past 5 years finally tear itself apart. It collapsed inward, then outward, then scattered into a million pieces of debris that would drift through space forever. 312. Valanthi stood in the cargo bay of an alien ship, staring at the destruction. They were alive. They should not have been alive. Everything they had been taught about physics and probabilities said they should have died with their station. But the humans had come anyway. The humans had done the impossible anyway, and now 312. Volanthio their lives to a species they had never even heard of 12 cycles ago. The Endurance drifted slowly through space, its engines barely functioning after the desperate race to reach the station. Captain Daniel Hayes sat in his chair on the bridge, staring at screens that showed him nothing but bad news. The ship had given everything it had. Now it could barely move. Cirith found him there an hour after the rescue. She had spent that time walking through the ship, looking at the humans who had saved her people. Most of them had collapsed wherever they could find space. They slept on floors and in corners, their faces pale with exhaustion. Many of them were injured. Broken bones, burns, radiation exposure. They had pushed themselves far beyond any reasonable limit. "Your ship," Cirith said quietly, standing at the entrance to the bridge. "Will it survive?" Hayes turned to look at her. His eyes were red and tired, but he managed a small smile. "Probably. We burned through about 3 years' worth of fuel getting here. The engines are going to need a complete rebuild. Half our systems are running on backup power," as he shrugged. "But the Endurance is tough. She will get us home eventually." "You risked everything," Cirith said. "Your ship, your crew, for people you had never met, people you did not even know existed until a few cycles ago." Hayes was quiet for a moment. He picked up a cup of cold coffee from his console and took a long drink before answering. "You sent a distress signal," he said simply. "Someone was in trouble. We had a ship that could maybe get there in time." He set down the cup. "That is really all there is to it." Cirith shook her head. She had lived among the stars for her entire life. She knew how civilizations operated. She knew that resources were limited, and risks had to be calculated, and some lives simply could not be saved. That was the way of things. That was how the galaxy worked. "The Concord told us to accept our fate," she said. "They said that saving us was impossible. They had calculated the odds." "I do not really like odds," Hayes admitted. "They tend to be discouraging." "But you knew." "You knew that reaching us in time would require pushing your ship beyond all safe limits. You knew that the rescue itself would be incredibly dangerous. You knew that you might all die trying." Hayes nodded slowly. "Yes, we knew then why." "I do not understand. What do you gain from saving us? We have nothing to offer you. We are not wealthy. We are not powerful. We cannot repay this debt." The captain was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "About 200 years ago on Earth, there was a man named Theodore Roosevelt. He said something that has stuck with my people ever since. He said that the credit belongs to the one who is actually in the arena. The one who strives and fails and tries again, not the critic who points out how the strong stumble, but the one who actually tries to do the deed." He turned to face Cirith fully. "We are a young species, Commander. We have made more mistakes than I could possibly count. We have hurt each other in ways that still shame us. But somewhere along the way, we decided that we wanted to be the people who try. Not the people who calculate whether trying is worth it. Just the people who try, even when it is foolish. Especially when it is foolish. Because sometimes the foolish thing is also the right thing." In the medical bay, Lieutenant Kate Morrison was lying on a bed while a human doctor worked on her injuries. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, radiation burns on her hands and arms. She should have been unconscious. Instead, she was arguing with the doctor about when she could get back to work. Cirith found her there and stood watching for a moment. Morrison noticed her and waved off the doctor's protests. "Commander, is everyone settled?" "Yes. Your people have given us food and blankets and a place to rest. They have been very kind." Morrison nodded. "Good, that is good. I wanted to ask you something," Cirith said. "In the station, when you went back into that dangerous area to save those children, you knew it might kill you. I could see it in your eyes. You knew, and you went anyway." "I did. Why?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, staring at the ceiling. When she answered, her voice was thoughtful. "When I was young, there was a fire in my neighborhood. A building collapsed with people trapped inside. The emergency team said it was too dangerous to go in. They said anyone who tried would probably die. And then this old man, he must have been 70 years old, he just walked past them and went in anyway. He pulled 3 people out before the building finally came down. She turned to look at Cirith. I asked him afterward why he did it. Why he risked his life when everyone was telling him it was hopeless. You know what he said? Cirith shook her head, said because they were scared and alone and I could not live with myself if I did not try. That is it. That is the whole answer. We do these things because we could not live with ourselves if we did not. The Endurance limped through space for the next several cycles, slowly making its way toward the nearest human outpost. During that time, Cirith got to know the crew. She learned their names and their stories. She learned about Earth, a small blue world that seemed far too fragile to produce such stubborn people. She learned that humans had nearly destroyed themselves many times. Wars, plagues, environment, disasters. They had come close to extinction more than once, but they had survived. They had rebuilt. They had reached the stars, and when they heard a cry for help from the darkness, they had come running. On the last night before they reached the outpost, Cirith sat with Captain Hayes in the small room he called his office. It was cluttered with books and pictures and strange human objects she did not recognize. On his desk was a photograph of a woman and 2 children, smiling at the camera. Your family? She asked. My wife and daughters. They are waiting for me back on Earth. He picked up the photograph and looked at it for a long moment. They knew I might not come back from this mission. I told them that before we left. What did they say? Hayes smiled. My wife said, then you had better come back. My oldest daughter said, bring everyone home, Dad. My youngest just hugged me and told me to be careful. And you still went? I still went? Because somewhere out there, 312 people had families too. Parents and children and friends who were waiting for them to come home. And if there was any chance we could make that happen, we had to try. Cirith did not have words for what she felt in that moment. Her people were logical. They believed in reason and calculation and accepting what could not be changed. But these humans, these strange, soft creatures from a world she had never seen, they believed in something else entirely. They believed in trying. They believed in hope. They believed that no odds were too long and no distance was too far when someone needed help. And somehow, against all reason, that belief had kept her people alive. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within days, every major civilization knew what had happened. A dying station, a desperate signal, and a species no one had ever heard of doing something no one believed possible. The story was told and retold, growing larger with each telling. The Galactic Concord could not ignore it. For 10,000 years, they had been the supreme authority in civilized space. 12 elder species, each one ancient and powerful, working together to maintain order and peace. They had built an empire of reason and logic. They had created rules that governed how civilizations interacted. They had calculated acceptable losses and made hard decisions. Based on cold mathematics, and now a young species from a backwater world had made them look like cowards. Hi, Arbiter. Vorlon called an emergency session. The great chamber on the Concord homeworld filled with representatives from all 12 species. Ancient beings who had shaped the galaxy for millennia gathered to discuss what they called the human problem. Admiral Cathros of the Sanathi spoke first. His species were warriors, proud and strong, with a military tradition stretching back 8,000 years. They had conquered 100 worlds before joining the Concord. I have analyzed the data from the rescue, he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. The human ship traveled at speeds that exceed anything in our theoretical models. They pushed their technology far beyond safe operational limits. Any of our vessels attempting the same journey would have been destroyed. He paused, and when he continued, there was something in his voice that sounded almost like fear. Their engineering is crude by our standards, inefficient, primitive in many ways, and yet somehow they made it work. They found ways to do things that our scientists have said are impossible, not through superior technology, but through sheer determination to make it happen. Scholar Myrene of the Orvali spoke next. Her species were thinkers, philosophers who had spent millions of years studying the nature of reality itself. They had libraries containing the knowledge of 1,000 extinct civilizations. "We have studied the humans extensively since this incident," she said. "Their history is troubling. They are a young species, barely 300,000 years old. In that time, they have nearly destroyed themselves at least 6 times. They wage wars with horrifying frequency. They pollute their own planet. They make decisions based on emotion rather than logic." She looked around the chamber at her fellow council members. "By every measure we use to evaluate species, they should have gone extinct long ago. They are violent, irrational, and reckless. And yet they not only survive, but continue to grow stronger. They reach the stars faster than any species in recorded history. They adapt to challenges at a rate that defies our models." "They are dangerous," Admiral Kethros said. "That is what you are saying." "I am saying that we do not understand them," Scholar Myrene replied. "And that which we do not understand, we cannot predict. And that which we cannot predict, we cannot control." The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. The Concord had always believed that the universe could be understood through reason, that every problem had a logical solution, that every species could be categorized and predicted. The humans defied that belief simply by existing. It was Elder Voss of the Calendry who finally broke the silence. Her species were the oldest in the Concord, ancient beyond measure. She had personally witnessed the rise and fall of empires. She had seen civilizations burn themselves out through war or simply fade away from stagnation. She had lived long enough to recognize patterns that others missed. "You were all asking the wrong questions," she said, her voice thin but strong. "You were asking whether the humans are dangerous, whether they are predictable, whether they fit into our models, but none of that matters." She rose from her seat, moving slowly with the weight of her countless years. "The question we should be asking is this. When the Velanthe sent their distress call, what did we do?" No one answered. They all knew. "We calculated the odds," Elder Voss continued. "We measured the risks. We determined that saving them was impossible, and so we did not try. We told them to accept their fate. We told them to find peace in death. We did what we have always done. We made the logical choice." She turned to look at each member of the council in turn. And what did the humans do? They did not calculate. They did not measure. They heard a cry for help, and they came running. They pushed their ship beyond every limit, risked their lives for strangers they had never met, and saved 312 people who we had decided were already dead. "They were reckless," Admiral Kethros said. "Yes," Elder Voss agreed. "They were. And because of their recklessness, 312 Velanthe are alive today. Because of their refusal to accept impossible odds, families were reunited. Children grew up with their parents. Lives continued that we had written off." She walked to the center of the chamber, where a holographic display showed the rescue mission playing out in miniature. "We have built our civilization on reason," she said, "on careful calculation, on measured responses, on the acceptance of what we call acceptable losses. We have survived for 10,000 years by never taking unnecessary risks. We are proud of this. We consider it wisdom." She watched the tiny human ship crash through debris to reach the dying station. "But we have also stopped growing, stopped reaching, stopped hoping. We have become so afraid of failure that we no longer try anything that might fail. We have become so logical that we have forgotten how to be brave." High Arbiter Vorlin spoke for the first time. "What are you suggesting, Elder? That we abandon reason? That we become as reckless as these humans?" "No," Elder Voss said. "I am suggesting that we remember something we have forgotten. I am suggesting that logic without courage is just cowardice dressed in pretty words. I am suggesting that acceptable losses is just a way of saying we were too afraid to try." She turned to face the council directly. "The humans terrify you. I can see it in your faces. But it is not their ships or their weapons that frighten you. It is the mirror they hold up to us. They show us what we used to be before we became old and tired and afraid. They show us what we could be again if we had the courage." The council sat in stunned silence. No one had ever spoken to them this way. No one had ever questioned the fundamental assumptions of Concord philosophy. Humans, Elder Voss continued, they are young and foolish and dangerous. They make mistakes. They act before thinking. They take risks that make no logical sense. But they also do something that we have forgotten how to do. They hope. They believe that things can be better. They refuse to accept that some people are simply not worth saving. She returned to her seat, suddenly looking very tired. That is why they terrify us. Because somewhere deep inside, we know they are right. We know that we have been making excuses for our cowardice. We know that every time we calculated acceptable losses, we were just too afraid to do the right thing. The chamber remained silent for a long time after she finished speaking. 5 years had passed since the rescue of the Valenthi station. In that time, the humans of Earth had become something the galaxy had never seen before. They were not the strongest species. They were not the smartest. They were not the most advanced, but they were something else entirely. They were the ones who showed up. When a plague struck the farming worlds of the Korathi Collective, human medical ships arrived within weeks. The Concord had declared the plague too virulent, too dangerous to risk exposure. They had advised quarantine and containment. They had calculated acceptable losses. The humans had ignored all of it. Dr. Amy Patterson led the medical team. She was a small woman with tired eyes and steady hands, and she worked 18-hour shifts for 3 months straight. Her team exposed themselves to the plague daily. They tested treatments, developed vaccines, and held the hands of dying patients when there was nothing else they could do. When asked why she would risk her life for a species she'd never even heard of before the outbreak, Dr. Patterson had looked confused by the question. They were sick, she said. We could help. What else were we supposed to do? The Korathi had no answer for that. No species in their history had ever come to help them without first negotiating payment or political advantage. The humans had simply shown up and started working. When the Dreamati homeworld was threatened by an asteroid, Concord calculated that evacuation was impossible. The asteroid was too large, moving too fast. They advised the Dreamati to prepare for the end. They offered to preserve their cultural records in the Great Archives. The humans offered something different. A young engineer named Chris Turner proposed a plan so reckless that the Concord's Physics Council declared it theoretically impossible. He wanted to fly ships directly into the asteroid's path, drill into its core, and detonate fusion warheads from the inside to shatter it into pieces small enough to burn up in the atmosphere. That is insane, Admiral Kethros had told him. The timing alone would need to be perfect to within milliseconds. Any error would result in the complete destruction of your ships and crews. Yes, Turner had agreed. It probably will not work. But if we do nothing, 3 billion Dramati definitely die. If we try this, maybe they do not. He had smiled then, a strange human expression that Kethros did not understand. Like maybe better than definitely, the mission succeeded. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything the Concord believed possible, the human ships flew into the heart of a mountain of rock and ice and blew it apart from the inside. 2 of the 3 ships were destroyed. 11 humans died. But 3 billion Dramati lived. When Chris Turner returned to Earth, he was asked if he had been afraid. Terrified, he admitted, but those people down there were more scared than me. Seemed unfair to let them face it alone. The Dramati erected a statue in his honor. It stood in the center of their largest city, a human figure, looking up at the stars. The inscription read simply, "He came when we called. Captain Daniel Hayes, retired from active service 3 years after the Valenthi rescue." His ship, the Endurance, was finally beyond repair. He had pushed her too hard for too long. In the end, she was put in a museum on Earth, a monument to what humans could do when they refused to give up. Hayes moved to a small farm in a place called Montana. He grew vegetables and raised chickens and wrote letters to the 312 Valanthi he had saved. Every year on the anniversary of the rescue, he received 312 letters back. Commander Sirith visited him once. Traveling all the way from Valenthi space to see the man who had changed her world, she found him in his garden, pulling weeds under a yellow sun. "Hey, It is beautiful here, she said, looking at the mountains in the distance. It is home, Hayes replied. I have seen a lot of stars, Commander, but I always wanted to come back here. Do you ever regret it? The missions, the risks, everything you sacrificed? Hayes thought about the question for a long moment. He looked at his weathered hands, at the scars from old injuries that had never quite healed. I think about the people I lost, he said finally. Good people who died because I asked them to follow me into danger. That never gets easier. He looked up at Cirith. But then I think about the ones we saved. 312 Valanthi, 3 billion Dramati, countless others over the years. And I know that if I had to do it all again, I would not change a thing. Lieutenant Kate Morrison eventually became Admiral Morrison. She commanded the largest humanitarian fleet in human history, a collection of ships whose only purpose was to answer distress calls. They went wherever they were needed, regardless of politics or profit, or the calculations of acceptable risk. She never lost her habit of personally leading rescue operations, even when her officers begged her to stay on the bridge where it was safe. Safe is for people who have given up, she would say. I have got too much to do. The Galactic Concord eventually offered humanity membership. The vote was unanimous, not because they believed humans belonged, but because they had finally understood what humanity represented. The humans brought something to the galaxy that had been missing for thousands of years. They brought hope. When the human ambassador, soft-spoken woman named Grace Sullivan, addressed the Concord for the first time, she did not speak of power or technology or conquest. She spoke of a simple truth. You know we are small, she said, standing before the assembled representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. We know we are young. We know that the universe is vast and cold and full of dangers we cannot imagine. But we also know this. No one should have to face the darkness alone. She paused, looking around at the ancient beings who had shaped the galaxy for millennia. When we heard the Valanthi calling for help, we did not stop to ask whether saving them was possible. We only asked whether we could live with ourselves if we did not try. That is what it means to be human. We do not accept acceptable losses. We do not calculate the value of a life. We simply refuse to let go. In the silence that followed, High Arbiter Vorlon finally understood why the arrival of humanity had terrified the galaxy. It was not their ships. It was not their weapons. It was not their reckless courage or their impossible determination. It was the realization that the galaxy had grown old and tired and comfortable with the idea that some things were simply not worth fighting for. The elder species had built their civilization on reason and logic, and somewhere along the way they had forgotten that there were things more important than being reasonable. The humans had reminded them. With every impossible rescue, with every foolish mission, with every life saved against all odds, the humans had shown the galaxy what it had forgotten. Some things are worth dying for. Some people are worth saving. And sometimes the foolish thing is also the right thing. The Valanthi built a monument on their new homeworld. It was a simple pillar of white stone, standing alone on a hilltop where the sun rose each morning. On it were carved 312 names, one for each person who had survived the station. And below the names, in the language of every species in the Concord, were the words that the humans had sent across the void. We are coming. Hold on. And in the end, that was what humanity brought to the galaxy. Not weapons or technology or political power, just a simple promise made to strangers in the dark. We are coming. Hold on. We will always come.